They said the Zero could dance around anything America put in the sky. In 1942, that felt true. U.S. pilots watched tight-turning Japanese fighters slice through formations and wondered if the Pacific belonged to someone else. But within a year, a new shape rolled onto carrier decks. Bigger than the Wildcat, heavier in the right places, and built for a different kind of fight. Here's the question we'll answer today. Why did the U.S. Navy need the F6F Hellcat? And what made it different from day one? Stay with me. By the end of part 1, you'll see exactly how this workmanlike brawler was engineered to survive, to hit harder, and to change the math of the air war. The first lesson came at a terrible price. Early in the Pacific, American pilots discovered that the Mitsubishi A6M0 was deadly in a slow fight. It turned tighter, climbed well at low speeds, and seemed to appear out of nowhere. But that agility had a hidden cost. To keep the Zero light, Japanese designers left out things Western pilots were starting to treat as essential: self-sealing fuel tanks, armor for the pilot, and heavy structural protection. As the war wore on, those missing pieces would matter more than raw nimbleness. U.S. Navy leadership took away a simple problem statement. We need a carrier fighter that can take a hit, give a bigger one back, and still bring its pilot home. Grumman, already supplying the F4F Wildcat, went to work on a new machine that would start with survivability and end with firepower. The company's engineers didn't try to out-Zero the Zero. They built a brawler. From the start, the Hellcat was wrapped around an engine with serious lungs. Early prototypes flew in 1942, and production models centered on the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, one of the great piston engines of the war. That power let designers add the weight that kept pilots alive: thicker armor, bullet-resistant glass, and self-sealing tanks. Instead of a delicate rapier, the Navy asked for a sturdy hammer, and Grumman delivered. Firepower was equally straightforward. The standard Hellcat carried 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns in the wings. That mattered for 2 reasons. First, reliability. These guns worked in heat, cold, salt, and spray. Second, volume. 6 guns firing together gave U.S. pilots a dense, familiar pattern that chewed through engines and fuel tanks. Later night fighter variants traded 2 of those 50s for 20mm cannon and added radar. But the core idea never changed. Simple, brutal, dependable punch. Everything about the airframe served carrier life. The landing gear had the stance and shock absorption for hard deck arrivals. The cockpit gave better forward visibility than many rivals on final approach. And maintenance access was designed with sailors in mind. Panels you could reach, parts you could swap, and systems that didn't need boutique care on a rolling, pitching ship. That meant higher sortie rates and more jets in the air when the fleet needed them most. You'll see how that pays off in part 2. But a machine is only half the story. The other half is the way you fight with it. Before the Hellcat ever saw combat, U.S. pilots had already learned not to play the Zero's game. Don't circle slowly. Don't bleed energy. Fight in pairs. Use altitude to start the fight fast, then use speed to leave it when you choose. One life-saving tactic: the Thatch Weave, designed by John "Jimmy" Thatch. Let 2 fighters cover each other, crossing paths so that an attacker chasing one pilot was suddenly in the gun sights of the other. Brought forward from the Wildcat era, it became even more dangerous in the hands of Hellcat pilots, whose aircraft handled rolls and dives better at high speed. So what exactly made the Hellcat different from day one? Start with survivability. Compared to the Zero, a Hellcat pilot sat behind armor and self-sealing tanks. A glancing hit that would flame a Zero might scar a Hellcat and send it back to the carrier for dinner. That difference, pilot lives saved, built experience inside squadrons. Veterans stayed alive to teach rookies. Rookies became veterans faster. The airplane multiplied human learning simply by refusing to die as easily. Next, power put pilots in charge. With the R2800, a Hellcat could dive hard, level out, and still have throttle in hand. That meant the American pilot often decided when to fight and how to leave. The Zero's controls stiffened at speed, and its dive limits were low. The Hellcat could run the fight at higher energy where the Zero's famous turn wasn't the trump card anymore. Even if the Hellcat wasn't the fastest Allied fighter on paper, it had the right power where carrier pilots lived and fought, taking off heavy, climbing into a combat air patrol, then dropping fast to pounce. Then there's firepower and forgiveness. 650s gave predictable recoil and sight picture. Pilots trained on that setup stateside and met the enemy without relearning muscle memory. The airplane's deck manners, stable on approach, honest on the throttle, kept accidents down and aircraft available. On a wartime carrier, fewer crashes on landing meant more fighters ready at dawn. In war, boring is a compliment. All that design work became real on a date worth remembering. August 31, 1943. U.S. carriers struck Marcus Island, and the Hellcat saw its first combat. It wasn't yet the legend we remember. It was a new aircraft in a live fire test. But the debut showed two things clearly. One, the Navy now had a fighter that matched its doctrine: hit first, hit hard, and come home. Two, the enemy had lost the guarantee of a turning knife fight at slow speed. The Pacific's air war was about to tilt. Early skirmishes taught quick lessons. Pilots reported that the Hellcat held energy well through high-speed maneuvers and punished attackers who tried to cling on in the vertical. Squadrons doubled down on teamwork. Controllers learned how to layer combat air patrols at different heights so Hellcats could drop like anvils on incoming raids. The "don't turn with a zero" rule became muscle memory, not just a caution in a manual. And every landing that ended with a pilot unbuckling behind armor was a small victory that the statistics would later make obvious. Let's pause on the design philosophy, because it explains why the F6F mattered beyond the Pacific. Other fighters of the era chased absolute speed, lightness, or exotic technology. The Hellcat's genius was balance: enough speed to control the fight, enough strength to survive it, enough simplicity to keep flying from a ship at sea, day after day. When people call Grumman aircraft rugged, this is what they mean: an airplane that stayed in the war long enough for its pilots to learn how to win. By the end of our 20 minutes, you should see the outline: a Navy that asked for a survivor, a company that engineered a bruiser around a world-class engine, and a pilot corps trained to fight on its own terms. The Hellcat wasn't built to impress on a showroom floor. It was built to be there, every morning, when carriers turned into the wind. The ocean is quiet before dawn. On the flight deck, the Navy paints a ladder into the sky. One patrol at 10,000 feet, another at 15,000, a third even higher, waiting for shapes that might be friend, might be fire. The radios crackle. A direction officer in a darkened room studies a glowing scope and says 5 calm words that change everything. Vector 300. Angels 20. In the next 20 minutes, the Pacific stops being a map and becomes a kill zone. Here's the question we'll answer in this chapter: how did the Hellcat swing operational momentum and crush Japanese carrier air power? Stay with me as we move from Tarawa to Rabaul to Truk and into the Marianas, where the math turns brutal. The turn begins in late 1943, when American carriers return to the Central Pacific with a faster tempo and a new fighter that doesn't flinch. At Tarawa, the job is ugly and close: fighter cover, strafing, bombing, and constant combat air patrol over a tiny island ringed by coral and fire. What matters here isn't a single duel, it's sortie rate and survival. Hellcats can take punishment, come back with holes, and launch again. On Enterprise, air groups transition into the new F6F3 just in time for Operation Galvanic, the assaults on Tarawa and Macon in November 1943. The learning is immediate: keep altitude, hit fast, and, when in doubt, climb away and re-attack. The fighter isn't just protecting ships, it's shaping the beachhead hour by hour. But the real proving ground isn't over the atoll, it's the Rabaul skies, where veteran Japanese aviators once ruled the Solomons. In early November 1943, U.S. carriers push strikes toward that fortress harbor. Hellcats sweep ahead, engage interceptors, and then ride shotgun for dive bombers and torpedo planes slashing at cruisers and destroyers. These are hard, chaotic fights. Pilots bring damaged aircraft home, sometimes without flaps or radios, and still the carriers come back the next day. Losses happen on both sides, but something critical changes: experience. Hellcat pilots live to fly again, and squadrons bank lessons after every sortie. Rabaul's defenders keep losing irreplaceable veterans. America's decks keep filling with crews who return wiser than they were yesterday. That exchange rate, knowledge retained versus talent lost, tilts the future. When we talk about momentum, we mean this. By early 1944, the fast carriers aren't just raiding, they're dismantling Japan's forward reach. Nowhere shows this better than Truk Lagoon, the base the Allies called the Gibraltar of the Pacific. At dawn on February 17, 1944, fighter sweeps go in first. Hellcats swarm over the airfields at Eton, Moen, and Perham, breaking up the defense before bombers arrive. They bounce scrambling interceptors, rake parked aircraft, and clear lanes for the strike packages that follow. Over 2 days, Operation Hailstone, the carrier force burns fuel depots, sinks ships, and wrecks air strength. When the smoke clears, Truk is no longer a sanctuary. It's a graveyard, and Japan's fleet must limp back to safer waters. The Hellcat isn't the only actor here, but it's the one that makes sure almost nothing lifts to fight back. Why is the exchange suddenly so one-sided? Part of the answer is mechanical. The Zero can still turn like a blade at low speed, but the higher energy fights of 1944 expose its compromises. No self-sealing tanks, little pilot armor, poor dive limits. In the hands of elite pilots, early war Zeros felt unbeatable. By 1944, with fights starting higher and faster, those trade-offs become fatal. The Hellcat thrives where the Zero stiffens and breaks. The rest of the answer is human. Japan's training pipeline is collapsing. Too little fuel, too little time. Where 1941 aviators averaged hundreds of hours, by 1944 many new naval pilots reach combat with far less flight time, thrown into battles against U.S. airmen who often have more experience and better radar guidance. This isn't about courage, it's about preparation, and the preparation is no longer equal. The Marianas. In June 1944, the U.S. goes for the throat. Saipan, Tinian, Guam, and the Imperial Navy answers with its best remaining carrier force. The fleets close across the Philippine Sea. This is more than a clash of aircraft. It's a clash of systems, radar, fighter direction, layered patrols, deck cycles, refueling choreography, and the sheer number of planes you can put over a datum on short notice. Hellcats sit at the center of that web. Picture the American screen as stacked cap. Combat air patrols at multiple altitudes, constantly refreshed. In a combat information center, fighter direction officers read scopes, marry radar tracks to radio calls, and vector divisions onto inbound raids long before the ships are in visual range. The goal isn't a fair fight. It's interception at a time and place the defenders choose, at an altitude where Hellcats own the dive and the roll. On June 19, 1944, wave after wave of Japanese strike aircraft comes in from different bearings. The cap meets them high and far out, guided by radar, then slashes from above, breaks, climbs, and slashes again. The result is slaughter. U.S. pilots later joke that it felt like a turkey shoot. Beneath the headlines is the machinery that made it possible. Radar ranges measured in minutes of warning, radios linking controllers and fighters, and a fighter rugged enough to keep diving, firing, and climbing back for another pass. Numbers tell the rest of the story. In 2 days, the Japanese lose hundreds of aircraft and, far worse, a critical mass of trained carrier pilots. American losses occur, especially to ships struck by submarines and flight deck accidents, but as a carrier air arm, Japan's offensive power is gutted. It will never recover. The battle is remembered as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, and it isn't hyperbole. From this point on, Japanese carriers can still sail, but without veteran flyers, they're decoys more than weapons. The Hellcat isn't the only reason. Anti-aircraft guns, proximity-fused shells, and disciplined ship handling all matter. Yet it's the Hellcat that meets the raid first, tears out its heart, and returns for more. Altitude control. When the defender chooses the fight's height, the Zero's tight turn circle doesn't decide the outcome. Energy does. Hellcats dive into the merge with speed to spare, make one lethal pass, then climb away out of reach. If an attacker follows, he bleeds energy and becomes a target for the next division coming down the ladder. This rhythm, dive, fire, extend, climb, is the anti-Zero playbook executed at scale. Deck rhythm. The U.S. carrier groups perfect the art of turning wind into sorties. Launch cycles bring fresh Hellcats overhead before the earlier division is exhausted. Planes get fuel, ammo, minor repairs, and go right back up. Safe landings matter as much as kills. The Hellcat's manners on the boat mean more cap on station when the next raid appears. Fighter direction. A veteran in a windowless room, eyes on a cathode scope, shifts the whole geometry of a battle. He plots the bearing and altitude of inbound raids, assigns sectors, and sends divisions precisely where they'll land on top of enemy formations. Not in front of them, not behind them, but above them. The first shots come from a place of advantage because a human being with a headset and a pencil put them there. Pilot experience. By mid-1944, many Hellcat pilots are on their second tour or have flown enough combat to read a fight on instinct. Japan's hurried training, cut by fuel shortages and time, cannot give its rookies equivalent seasoning. That imbalance shows up everywhere. In steadier gunnery, better division coordination, cleaner brake turns, smarter disengagements. It's a razor's edge of skill, multiplied by a machine designed to keep you alive long enough to get better. And then there's psychology. Air combat is stress turned into split-second choices. In a Hellcat, you can accept a little damage to finish a pass. In a Zero, you live with the knowledge that a burst near the tank can make the cockpit a furnace. Over the Marianas, you can feel that psychological gap harden into tactics. The side willing to press through a few tracers to hold firing position tends to decide the moment. The side that must never be hit has to fly perfectly. In 1944, perfect is no longer a plan. By the evening of June 20th, the U.S. launches a famous Mission Beyond Darkness, striking at extreme range and landing in the night by the thin lines of destroyers' searchlights. It's not a pure Hellcat story. Bombers carry the main blow, but even here the fighter's reliability matters. What the pilots bring home from those days isn't just scorecards, it's the confidence that the enemy's carrier arm cannot mount another full-strength strike. The war has changed shape. Step back and look at the arc from Tarawa to Rabaul to Truk to the Marianas. At Tarawa, the Hellcat proves it can stay. Launch, fight, recover, launch again. Over Rabaul, it proves it can break veteran opposition and still bring pilots back. At Truk, it helps strip a forward fortress of its ships and air power. In the Marianas, linked to radar and fighter direction, it helps erase Japan's carrier aviation as an effective weapon. The same airframe that shrugged off flak over Baitio becomes the scalpel that carves raids to pieces 80 miles from the fleet. That versatility, fighter cover, strike escort, sweeps, cap, makes the Hellcat not just a good machine, but the right machine for a Navy that fights from moving airfields. So when people ask why the Hellcat crushed the Zero, the fairest answer is this: it didn't win a beauty contest, it won an ecosystem. A rugged fighter, flown by increasingly seasoned pilots, directed by radar and trained controllers, launched from carriers that mastered the tempo of modern war. The Zero remained deadly in the hands of a master. Always respect your enemy. But by 1944, the fight no longer took place on its terms. The center of gravity had shifted, and with it, the Pacific. Night falls on the fleet. The sea is black glass, the carriers just shadows. Somewhere out there, an enemy pilot is lining up his run. Two Hellcats lift into the dark, guided by a disembodied voice and a green radar glow inside a bomber flying ahead of them. They cannot see their target. They are told where to turn, when to climb, when to fire. For the first time in naval history, U.S. carrier fighters are hunting at night. And the question for this final chapter is simple. Who carried the Hellcat to its legendary record? And what is the fighter's lasting legacy? Stay with me. By the end, we'll meet the aces, crack the night war, lay out the scoreboard, and ask why this plain fighter beat sleeker rivals and then wrote itself into post-war memory. Start with the human edge. In 1944, Commander David McCampbell strapped into a blue F6F and put on a show that still sounds impossible. He finished the war as the U.S. Navy's top ace with 34 victories, and on October 24, 1944, at the opening of Leyte Gulf, he shot down 9 enemy aircraft in a single mission, an American record. His wingman that morning, Ensign Roy Rushing, splashed 6 more. This wasn't luck. It was a pilot who could read the fight, fly a stable gun platform, and rely on an airplane that stayed lethal when pushed hard. McCampbell's legend isn't just about numbers. It's about the Hellcat giving a cool, disciplined marksman the time and tools to work. He wasn't alone. On June 19, 1944, during the opening day of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Alex Vrasiu dove on a formation of incoming bombers and downed 6 in under 8 minutes. When he landed on Lexington, the photo of him holding up 6 gloved fingers became a symbol of the new air war. Radar-directed interceptions, stacked patrols, and Hellcats slashing from altitude, firing short, deadly bursts. Vrasiu finished the war as the Navy's 4th-ranking ace with 19 victories, and his story shows how quickly a well-trained pilot could dominate when the fight happened on his terms. Why did these men choose the Hellcat? And why did it let them make the most of a moment? Because it was forgiving, yet lethal. The F6F gave you a strong engine, simple handling on the boat, steady gunnery with 6 50 cal Brownings, and the protection to press a firing pass through a little flak or a few tracers. Survival bred experience. Experience bred better choices. Better choices won fights. That loop, pilot saved, lesson kept, paid off across the fleet. Now to the scene I teased at the start. The Night War. In November 1943, Medal of Honor ace Edward "Butch" O'Hare helped test an improvised bat team from USS Enterprise, a radar-equipped TBF Avenger guiding two F6F Hellcats to intercept enemy bombers after dark. The idea was new and risky. O'Hare himself was lost on a night mission on November 26, 1943. But the concept worked. It opened the door to a purpose-built night fighter Hellcat, the F6F-5N, with a wing-mounted AN/APS-6 radar and a heavier gun mix, two 20mm cannon and four 50 cals. Carrier groups could now defend themselves around the clock, and fighters could pounce on intruders who once had the night to themselves. It's hard to overstate how modern that felt in 1943–44. By 1944–45, the Hellcat wasn't only a guardian, it was also a strike hammer. The F6F-5 carried bombs and the new 5-inch HVAR rockets, turning a fighter into a beachhead bulldozer. Over the Marianas, across the Philippines, and onto Iwo Jima and Okinawa, squadrons that won air superiority at dawn could roll straight into close support by noon. Rockets for tanks and bunkers, bombs for supply dumps, strafing for airfields and gun positions. Pilots liked the airplane because it took punishment, hit hard, and came back with just enough left to do it again tomorrow. Let's put numbers on the scoreboard. In roughly 2 years of intense service, Hellcat pilots were credited with 5,156 enemy aircraft destroyed, about 75% of the U.S. Navy's aerial victories in the Pacific, and an approximate 19.1 air-to-air kill ratio. Those numbers shock people, and they should. But remember what sat behind them. Sound tactics, radar direction, disciplined deck cycles, and a fighter that let pilots survive long enough to get good. On the other side, Japan's training pipeline was collapsing. By 1944, many new naval pilots reached combat with far fewer flight hours than their 1941 predecessors, a gap made worse by fuel shortages. Courage wasn't the issue, preparation was. In the Pacific of 1944, preparation decided the shape of the sky. One more piece of the legacy is scale. The Navy and Grumman built 12,275 Hellcats before production ended in late 1945, so many that at peak, one rolled off the line about every hour. Quantity mattered because carriers burned through airplanes and hours at a fierce rate. The front never waits. The Hellcat kept the decks full and the patrols stacked, day after day, until the job was done. What happened after the guns went quiet? The Hellcat faded from the front line as jets arrived, but the type stayed visible and symbolic. The Navy's new flight demonstration team, the Blue Angels, first flew F6F Hellcats in 1946 before moving on to faster aircraft. Museums still display night fighter noses with radar pods on the starboard wing, and veterans still talk about an airplane that brought them home when the deck was heaving and the fuel gauge was thin. The Hellcat's afterlife is a reminder that sometimes the right machine is the one that balances the whole equation, not just the headline numbers. So, what is the fighter's lasting legacy? Not that it was the fastest. The Corsair could outrun it. Not that it was the prettiest. Plenty of land-based types looked sleeker. The Hellcat's legacy is that it was the right tool at the right time. It matched U.S. carrier doctrine, fit the shipboard rhythm, accepted armor and fuel protection without complaint, and gave ordinary pilots a safe way to become extraordinary. It helped turn radar screens and radio calls into kills. It let an ace like McCampbell carve his name into history, and it let a young pilot on his first tour walk back into the ready room and learn for tomorrow. That's how you change a war, with a system that saves people, keeps them learning, and stacks small advantages until the map shifts under the enemy's feet. As we close, picture the last minutes of a long day in 1944. The fighters are returning at dusk. Deck crews wave them in. A Hellcat thumps down, wings fold, chocks in. Under the cowl, the engine ticks as it cools. In the cockpit, a pilot writes a single line in his log that doesn't capture the noise, the fear, or the teamwork that made it possible. Multiply that line by thousands of pilots, thousands of sorties, and you get the real legacy of the Hellcat, a plain-faced machine that let human skill and discipline decide the outcome. Air superiority is one, but who were the men flying it at the edge of the envelope, day and night? If you want a companion deep dive on Corsair versus Hellcat, tactics, myths, and what the numbers really say, drop Cat vs Corsair in the comments and subscribe for the next chapter of the Carrier Fighter story.